The air in the pantry was thick with the scent of forgotten spices and stale dust, a stark contrast to the crisp, expensive cologne radiating from the tall figure silhouetted against the sliver of light from the open door. 6-year-old Clara, a small hand clutching the hem of her father's tailored trousers, shivered, not from cold, but from an invisible chill that pierced her tiny frame. Her wide, pleading eyes, still red-rimmed from silent tears, sought reassurance in his rigid face, a face devoid of the warmth she so desperately craved. Gabriel, her father, saw only a nuisance, a pale, trembling reflection of a vulnerability he despised. His jaw was set, his gaze distant, already past her, past this inconvenience. "Stop your sniveling, Clara." His voice, usually a low rumble, was now a sharp, impatient whisper that cut through the silence. He gently, yet firmly, detached her fingers from his fabric. Her small heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. As she watched his hand reach for the doorknob, the darkness beyond him seemed to swell, threatening to swallow the last vestiges of light. A choked sob escaped her, a tiny gasp for air in a world suddenly devoid of it. She tried to speak, to beg, to understand, but only a desperate whimper found its way out. The heavy wooden door began to swing shut, slowly, inexorably, sealing her fate. The click of the lock reverberated through the small space, a sound of definitive abandonment that crushed her fragile hope. Utter blackness consumed her, a suffocating blanket that pressed down on her chest, stealing her breath. Her ingrained terror of confined spaces, of the dark, erupted into a silent scream that tore through her mind but remained trapped in her throat. She stumbled backwards, hands flailing in the void, searching for anything, anyone. The cold, rough floor met her small body with a jolt, and she crumpled, a tiny heap of despair in the suffocating gloom. If you had seen that scene, felt that sudden, absolute isolation, what would you have done? Panicked, Clara scrambled to her feet, her small hands scraping against the rough wooden shelves, knocking over forgotten jars that clattered ominously in the dark. Each sound amplified her fear, making the pantry feel even smaller, the air even thinner. She whimpered, pressing her face into her knees, trying to make herself disappear, to vanish from this cruel reality. The metallic tang of fear filled her mouth, mingling with the phantom taste of hunger that had gnawed at her for hours. Her small body ached, not just from the fall, but from the crushing weight of utter desolation, a loneliness so profound it felt like a physical pain. Hours bled into an eternity. The cold seeped into her bones, and the darkness became a living, breathing entity, whispering doubts into her innocent mind. Why was she here? Why had he left her? Had she been bad? Was she unlovable? The questions swirled, each one a sharp shard of glass piercing her already broken spirit. Her small, tear-stained face was a mask of pure terror and confusion, a silent testament to a heart shattered by the one person who should have protected it. She only wanted to be loved. Was that too much to ask? The heavy click of the pantry lock echoed not just in Clara's despair, but in the sterile silence of Gabriel's own meticulously ordered life. For him, the small, sniveling child wasn't a daughter, but a discordant note in his symphony of success. He had built an empire on ruthless efficiency and unyielding control, where emotions were liabilities and vulnerability a fatal flaw. Clara, with her wide, tear-filled eyes and trembling hands, was the embodiment of everything he despised, a constant, inconvenient reminder of a brief, ill-advised liaison he wished to erase. She was an unexpected variable, a splash of muddy water on his polished, unblemished existence, threatening to unravel the carefully constructed facade of invincibility he presented to the world. Gabriel's world revolved around his own desires, his ambitions, his comfort. Empathy was a foreign language he had never learned, a weakness he had systematically purged from his emotional vocabulary. His lavish lifestyle, the opulent penthouse, the endless stream of superficial connections, these were not merely possessions, but fortifications against genuine human connection, against the messiness of real emotion. Clara's neediness, her innocent plea for affection, felt like an invasion, a demand on resources he deemed exclusively his own, his time, his peace, his freedom. He saw her fragility not as something to protect, but as an imposition, a burden too heavy for his self-serving shoulders. Perhaps it was a seed planted in his own harsh upbringing, a childhood where vulnerability was punished and strength was the only currency. Gabriel had learned early to armor himself, to see softness as a dangerous path leading to exploitation. Clara's fear of the dark, her claustrophobia, her simple, human need for comfort. These were not only weaknesses in her, but mirrored an unacknowledged but buried fear within himself, a terror of losing control. He couldn't tolerate her fragility because he couldn't tolerate his own, long-suppressed human limitations. Her tears were a reflection he couldn't bear to see, a silent accusation of a tenderness he believed he had eradicated. His life before Clara had been an uninterrupted pursuit of personal gratification and professional dominance, a carefully choreographed dance of power and pleasure. Relationships were transactional, commitments avoided, and any hint of long-term responsibility deftly sidestepped, ensuring no emotional anchors could weigh him down. The sudden, undeniable reality of fatherhood had shattered this meticulously maintained equilibrium, introducing an element of unpredictability he found intolerable. Clara's mere presence represented a future he had never envisioned, a constraint he refused to accept, a constant demand for an emotional investment he was unwilling to make. The idea of sacrificing even a fraction of his curated freedom, of altering his image as an unattached, powerful force, was abhorrent. He rationalized his decision with cold logic. She was better off elsewhere, with people who wanted such a life. As the heavy door sealed Clara's fate, a flicker of something, perhaps a faint echo of what others called conscience, stirred within Gabriel. It was a brief, almost imperceptible tremor in his chest, quickly dismissed as an inconvenience, a residual sentimentality he deemed unworthy of his attention. He told himself he was making a difficult but ultimately necessary decision, for both of them, a clean break. He envisioned a life unburdened, a swift return to the pristine order he craved, free from the demands of a child. The image of her small, tear-streaked face was actively pushed from his mind, replaced by mental spreadsheets, upcoming deals, and the next conquest. He walked away, each step a further commitment to the illusion of his own unwavering strength, his unassailable resolve. But even Gabriel, in his fortress of self-importance, couldn't entirely escape the faint, insidious corrosion of his choice. The act of abandonment, while freeing him from an immediate burden, subtly calcified a part of his soul, making him colder, more isolated than before. He gained his freedom, but lost a piece of his humanity, perhaps the last fragile link to genuine connection. The world continued to admire his wealth, but the hollow echo in his grand, empty mansion grew louder with each passing year. He thought he was eliminating weakness, but instead, he cultivated a profound, rude internal void. You might think he felt nothing, but doesn't true emptiness feel heavier than any burden? Would you have done differently in his place? After what felt like an eternity, a jarring sound sliced through the pantry's suffocating silence. The heavy door groaned open, spilling a blinding rectangle of light onto Clara's huddled form. Her small, starved body, stiff from cold and terror, flinched violently. A woman's gasp, then muffled voices. Strong, unfamiliar hands gently lifted her, but the sudden touch only intensified her fear. She whimpered, pressing her face against a rough woolen sweater, the scent of antiseptic replacing the stale spices. Disoriented and barely conscious, she was a fragile bird, plucked from a dark nest, only to be thrust into an equally terrifying unknown. The world spun in a dizzying blur of concerned faces and hushed questions she couldn't comprehend. Her tiny heart still a frantic drum against her ribs. Could anyone truly understand the terror of being forgotten? The journey was a haze of flashing lights and unfamiliar faces, culminating in a sterile building that smelled faintly of bleach and sadness. This was the orphanage, a place of muted colors and hushed whispers, where children moved with a quiet resignation. Clara, still trembling, was led to a stark room with too many beds, each a small, isolated island. The walls were bare, the windows barred, and the air carried a constant chill that settled deep in her bones. She clung to a worn teddy bear, a gift from a sympathetic social worker, its matted fur offering scant comfort against the overwhelming sense of loss. Her eyes, wide and haunted, scanned the unfamiliar surroundings, searching for a sign of warmth, a flicker of kindness that never quite materialized in the indifferent glances of the staff. Night fell, bringing with it the familiar, suffocating darkness that had become her personal tormentor. The communal room plunged into shadow, and the whispers of other children died down, replaced by the ominous creaks of an old building. Clara pulled the thin blanket tighter, her body rigid with fear. Each shadow seemed to morph into the looming figure of her father, his face stern, his hand reaching for a doorknob. The click of the lock, forever seared into her memory, echoed in the silent chamber of her mind. Sleep offered no escape. Instead, it ushered in vivid nightmares of being trapped again, screaming into a void where no one heard. She woke with a gasp, her heart pounding, the cold sweat clinging to her small, frail body. Could a child ever truly escape the shadows of her past? Days in the orphanage bled into weeks, each one a monotonous cycle of bland meals, enforced quiet, and the crushing weight of anonymity. Clara was just another face in a sea of forgotten children, her individual pain lost in the collective suffering. No one asked about her fears. No one noticed the way she flinched at sudden movements, or how she instinctively recoiled from touch. She learned to blend in, to make herself small, to avoid drawing attention. Her once vibrant spirit, though fragile, began to dim, replaced by a quiet, watchful resignation. The colorful world she had once known, even with its harsh edges, was now a distant, faded memory, replaced by the muted grays and browns of institutional life. The hunger was a constant, gnawing presence, a hollow ache in her stomach that no amount of watery soup or dry bread could ever truly satisfy. Her small body, already weakened by days in the pantry, felt perpetually cold, especially at night when the draught seeped through the ill-fitting windows. She often dreamed of the warmth of her old bed, the soft blankets, the faint scent of lavender from her abandoned room, luxuries now unimaginable. The contrast was stark. From a life of abundance, albeit emotionally barren, to one of stark deprivation. Her skin grew paler, her limbs thinner, a living testament to the neglect that had stripped her not just of love, but of basic human comfort. Would you have been able to sleep in that cold, hard bed, night after night? More than the hunger or the cold, it was the pervasive loneliness that truly pierced Clara's young heart. She watched other children receive occasional visits from distant relatives or social workers who offered a fleeting moment of connection. For Clara, there was no one. The absence of a loving touch, a reassuring voice, left an aching void that echoed in her silent cries. She longed for a mother's embrace, a father's gentle hand, even the stern presence of Gabriel, if only it meant not being utterly alone. Her small hands often reached out in her sleep, grasping at empty air, a testament to the profound yearning for a connection that felt forever out of reach. Her trauma, an invisible shield, kept other children at a distance. Clara rarely spoke, her voice a fragile whisper when she did. Her eyes, perpetually wide with a mixture of fear and sorrow, made her seem unapproachable. The other children, sensing her deep-seated pain, often avoided her, drawn instead to those who could offer playful interaction. She spent hours alone, tucked away in corners, observing the others from a safe distance, feeling like an outsider in a world that had already cast her aside once. The playground, a place of joy for many, was for her a stark reminder of her isolation, a cruel stage for her silent, enduring suffering. In the quiet corners of her mind, Clara grappled with questions too heavy for a child's heart. Was I bad? Did I do something wrong to make him leave? Am I unlovable? Each unanswered question chipped away at her fragile sense of self-worth, planting seeds of doubt that threatened to take root. She replayed moments with her father, searching for a fault, a reason, but found only her own innocent requests for affection. The world had told her, through his actions, that she was not enough, that her very existence was an inconvenience. This silent condemnation became a heavy burden, shaping her perception of herself and her place in the world. Sometimes, a small, seemingly insignificant event would trigger a fresh wave of despair. A forgotten drawing, crumpled and discarded by another child, mirrored her own sense of worthlessness. A broken doll, its porcelain face cracked, became a symbol of her shattered innocence. She would find solace in these discarded objects, holding them close, projecting her own brokenness onto their inanimate forms. Her tears, often silent, would fall onto their cold surfaces, a private ritual of grief for a childhood stolen, for a love denied. These were the moments when the weight of her reality became almost unbearable, reminding her of everything she had lost. The terror of darkness and confined spaces was a constant companion, a ghost that haunted her waking hours and invaded her dreams. Even in the relatively open spaces of the orphanage, a sudden shadow, a closed door, could send a jolt of panic through her small frame. She would often seek out slivers of light, huddling near windows or under the faint glow of a hallway lamp, as if light itself could somehow protect her from the unseen horrors. This fear was more than just a phobia. It was a living, breathing scar, a constant, visceral reminder of the moment her father had locked her away, leaving her to battle her demons alone. One particularly bleak evening, as a cold rain lashed against the orphanage windows, Clara sat alone by a grimy pane, watching the world outside disappear into a swirling grey mist. She felt utterly disconnected, a small forgotten speck in a vast, indifferent universe. There was no hope, no warmth, no comfort to be found. Her parents were gone, her home a distant memory, and her future an empty canvas stretching out before her. A single silent tear traced a path down her pale cheek, tasting of salt and sorrow. She closed her eyes, wishing she could simply vanish, cease to exist. If you had seen her then, so utterly lost, what hope would you have offered? Could you have found a reason to keep going? The jarring sounds of the orphanage faded into a gentle hum of unfamiliar domesticity when Eleanor and Ricardo, a couple whose smiles held a warmth Clara hadn't known existed, brought her home. Their modest house, infused with the comforting scent of Elena's freshly baked bread and Ricardo's workshop sawdust, was a stark contrast to the sterile institution. Clara, still a silent, watchful shadow of her former self, moved through the small rooms with a hesitant grace, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and a fragile, nascent curiosity. The quiet kindness of her new parents was a foreign language, one she was slowly, tentatively, learning to understand, but the deep-seated terror of abandonment still clung to her like a second skin. How hard is it to accept love after so much rejection? Elena and Ricardo understood, without words, the invisible wounds Clara carried. They didn't push, didn't demand, but offered unwavering patience and a steady stream of small, quiet gestures of affection, a hand gently placed on her shoulder, a soft lullaby before bed, a homemade cookie left on her pillow, each act a tiny thread weaving a new tapestry of safety around her fragile heart. The cold, hard floor of the orphanage was replaced by warm wooden boards, the communal silence by the soft murmurs of their conversations. Yet, even wrapped in this newfound comfort, the night still held their terrors. Shadows danced, and the click of a closed door could still send a jolt of primal fear through her small frame. Could a new home, however loving, truly erase the shadows of the old one? School presented another daunting challenge, a sea of unfamiliar faces and boisterous laughter that Clara struggled to navigate. She retreated into herself, a quiet observer in the bustling classroom, her trauma an invisible barrier between her and the other children. It was in the art room, bathed in natural light and vibrant hues, that a different kind of silence began to settle. Ms. Isabel, her art teacher, possessed an uncanny ability to see beyond Clara's withdrawn demeanor, sensing an untapped well of emotion beneath the surface. With gentle encouragement, she handed Clara a box of crayons and a blank sheet of paper, inviting her to simply create, without judgment or expectation. What hidden talents might lie within a quiet child, waiting for the right moment to emerge? Mrs. Isabel's studio became Clara's sanctuary. The air, thick with the scent of paint and turpentine, felt less suffocating than the pantry's stale dust. Unlike others who saw only a shy, fearful girl, Ms. Isabel saw the intensity in Clara's gaze, the careful deliberation in her hesitant strokes. She didn't praise loudly, but offered quiet observations, asking open-ended questions about the dark, swirling colors Clara often chose. "What does this color feel like, Clara?" she would ask. Or, "Tell me about the story these shapes are trying to tell." For the first time, Clara felt truly seen, her inner world acknowledged and valued, not as a weakness but as a unique perspective. Haven't we all needed someone to see the best in us, even when we couldn't see it ourselves? Slowly, tentatively, Clara began to channel her deepest fears onto the canvas. The darkness that haunted her dreams found form in swirling charcoal, the feeling of being trapped in intricate, almost claustrophobic patterns. Tiny, isolated figures, resembling her own small self, appeared in vast, empty landscapes, their faces etched with silent sorrow. Ms. Isabel didn't try to lighten her palette or force her to draw cheerful scenes. Instead, she helped Clara refine her technique, showing her how to blend shadows, how to create depth, how to use light to highlight even the smallest flicker of hope. Art became her language, a powerful, unspoken narrative for the pain that had no words. How do you give voice to pain that has no words, when your heart holds too many unshed tears? The act of creation, of transforming her internal landscape into something tangible, brought a profound sense of release. Each brushstroke, each line, was a step towards reclaiming her own story. She wasn't just a victim of abandonment. She was an artist, capable of expressing the inexpressible. The nightmares didn't vanish completely, and the fear of darkness still lingered. But now Clara had a tool, a purpose. The art studio, a haven of light and color, became a symbol of her burgeoning strength, a place where her past, though still a shadow, no longer defined her future. She was beginning to believe, however fragilely, that she could be loved, that she was capable, that her voice, expressed through art, mattered. Sometimes, all a child needs is someone who says, "I believe in you." The warmth of Elena and Ricardo's home was a constant balm, and Miss Isabel's art studio a sanctuary. Yet the shadows of Clara's past were long and persistent. A sudden power outage plunged their cozy living room into absolute darkness one evening, and the familiar, suffocating terror clamped down on her small chest. The scent of Elena's baking bread vanished, replaced by the stale dust of the pantry. Her breath hitched, vision tunneling, and her hands instinctively flew to her throat, a choked sob escaping her lips. Ricardo's gentle hand on her arm only intensified the panic. She recoiled, scrambling backwards until her back hit a cold wall, the sensation eerily reminiscent of the wooden shelves. The progress she had so carefully built felt like a fragile sandcastle, collapsing under the relentless tide of memory. Have you ever felt the shadows creeping back in, even after finding your light? At school, her quiet demeanor, once a shield, now made her a target. A group of older children, noticing her preference for solitude in the art room, began to whisper, pointing at her dark, evocative paintings. "Look at the weirdo, always drawing sad stuff," one sneered, loud enough for Clara to hear. "No wonder she's so quiet, probably has no friends." Their cruel words, sharp and deliberate, pierced through her carefully constructed defenses, echoing Gabriel's disdain for her vulnerability. She felt the familiar sting of rejection, a cold hand squeezing her heart, reminding her of the fundamental flaw she believed she carried. The vibrant colors on her canvas suddenly felt dull. Her unique perspective twisted into something abnormal. Would you have stood up for her, or would fear have kept you silent? The taunts gnawed at her, fueling the deep-seated doubts about her worth. Was she truly weird? Was her art merely a reflection of her brokenness, rather than a testament to her strength? The voices of her past, insidious and persistent, whispered that she was unlovable, an inconvenience, just as her father had implicitly told her. She looked at her reflection, seeing not the budding artist Miss Isabel praised, but the pale, trembling child abandoned in a dark pantry, forever marked. The love of Elena and Ricardo, though constant, seemed to dim in the face of this internal assault. She began to question everything: her talent, her place in this loving home, even her right to happiness. When you've been told you're not enough, how do you find the strength to believe otherwise? A local youth art competition, a rare opportunity Ms. Isabel had encouraged her to enter, brought a fresh wave of despair. Clara submitted her most personal piece, a powerful oil painting depicting a small figure emerging from swirling darkness into a sliver of golden light. It was her soul laid bare, a narrative of her journey. The results came, and her painting, though acknowledged for its technical skill, was deemed too somber, lacking universal appeal, and ultimately not chosen for exhibition. The words hit her like a physical blow, invalidating her expression, her pain, her very identity. The art, her refuge, had become another source of rejection. What happens when the very thing that saves you starts to feel like another source of failure? The rejection, coupled with the lingering taunts and resurfacing fears, pushed Clara to the precipice of despair. The paintbrush felt heavy in her hand, the canvas a mocking blank stare. What was the point? Her art was too dark, too personal, too much a reflection of the pain she couldn't escape. Perhaps it was better to simply fade away, to become invisible, to stop trying. The idea of retreating into a quiet, unnoticed existence, free from the judgment and the effort of fighting, held a perverse allure. She imagined putting away her brushes, letting her colors dry, and embracing the silence that had once defined her. The effort of hope felt too exhausting, the path of healing too steep. Have you ever felt so overwhelmed that giving up seemed like the only escape? One night, the nightmares returned with a vengeance, more vivid and terrifying than ever before. She was back in the pantry, the air thick with dust, the darkness absolute, the click of the lock reverberating with an agonizing finality. The metallic taste of fear filled her mouth, her small hands scraping against phantom shelves, searching for a way out that didn't exist. She woke with a strangled scream, drenched in cold sweat, her heart hammering against her ribs as if trying to escape her chest. The claustrophobia was a living entity, pressing down on her, stealing her breath. The memory wasn't just a thought, it was a visceral re-experience, a stark reminder that her past was not just a story, but a wound that still bled. Can you imagine a darkness so profound it haunts your very breath, years later? Elena and Ricardo, ever watchful, sensed the deep despair that had settled over Clara. They didn't pry, but their presence was a quiet anchor. Elena would leave warm mugs of chamomile tea by her bed. Ricardo would sit with her in silent companionship, sometimes just reading a book, his presence a steady, reassuring weight. They knew they couldn't erase her pain, but they could offer a safe harbor. Their unwavering love was a constant, shimmering light, a stark contrast to the darkness that still threatened to consume her. Yet, Clara knew this was her battle, a solitary struggle against the demons of her own mind. Even with their boundless affection surrounding her, even with endless love, some battles must be fought alone, mustn't they? Ms. Isabel, noticing Clara's withdrawn silence and untouched canvases, approached her with gentle wisdom. She didn't scold or offer empty platitudes. Instead, she shared a story of her own early struggles, of how her art had been dismissed as too raw or too unconventional before finding its audience. Your art, Clara, she said softly, is your voice. It speaks of truths others might be afraid to acknowledge. Don't let their fear dim your light. The most profound beauty often emerges from the deepest shadows. Her words were a quiet revelation, a reminder that her uniqueness was not a flaw, but a strength, a testament to her resilience. Sometimes, a single voice of belief can cut through the loudest doubts. Do you agree? Clara sat alone in her room, the rejected painting leaning against the wall, its dark hues now seeming less like despair and more like a profound honesty. Miss Isabel's words echoed in her mind, mingling with the quiet, unwavering love of Elena and Ricardo. She remembered the feeling of the paintbrush in her hand, the quiet satisfaction of translating her inner world onto canvas. The pain was real, the fear a constant companion, but something deeper. A spark of defiant resilience began to stir within her. She wouldn't let her father's abandonment or the world's indifference define her. She would paint her truth, unapologetically. She wasn't just surviving, she was creating. She picked up her brush, a silent promise to herself. She fell, but something inside her wouldn't let her stay down. What's that something for you? The gallery hummed with a sophisticated buzz, a symphony of hushed conversations and appreciative murmurs. Spotlights illuminated Clara's latest collection, each canvas a vibrant tapestry of light and shadow, a testament to resilience. Clara, now 26, moved through the throng with an easy confidence, her dark hair swept back, her eyes, though still holding a flicker of the past, now shone with purpose and an unshakable inner strength. She wasn't just an artist, she was a storyteller, Her works raw, honest, and profoundly moving, resonating deeply with critics and collectors alike. This was her moment, a culmination of years of quiet perseverance, a triumph forged in the crucible of her own journey. Her art, once a silent scream, was now a powerful anthem. Amidst the elegant crowd, a figure, noticeably out of place, scanned the room with an almost desperate intensity. Gabriel, once an imposing titan of industry, was now a shadow of his former self. His expensive suit hung loosely on his frame. His eyes, once sharp and commanding, now held a haunted, almost vacant look. His empire, built on ruthlessness and ambition, had crumbled in a spectacular fall from grace, leaving him stripped of his wealth and, more painfully, his public image. He had heard whispers of a new prodigy, an artist named Clara, whose works were stirring profound emotion. A faint, unsettling familiarity in her published photograph had drawn him here, a desperate, opportunistic hope to latch onto something, anything, that might restore a sliver of his lost prestige. His gaze finally landed on her, standing near a large, abstract piece swirling with gold and deep blues. For a moment she was just a celebrated artist. Then a subtle tilt of her head, a familiar curve of her jawline, and the breath caught in his throat. It couldn't be. The pale, trembling child he had abandoned in the pantry, the nuisance he had so ruthlessly erased from his life, was now this poised, formidable woman. The years had sculpted her, not into a victim, but into a masterpiece of resilience. Disbelief warred with a chilling certainty. The world had not forgotten her, it had celebrated her. And he, her father, was seeing her for the first time as a complete stranger, yet undeniably his own. Clara felt a prickle on the back of her neck, a familiar, unsettling sensation that had always signaled the presence of something discordant. She turned, her eyes slowly sweeping the room, and then they landed on him, Gabriel. The years had etched new lines of hardship on his face, but the cold, distant gaze was unmistakable, a ghost from her darkest memories. A tremor, almost imperceptible, ran through her, but she held her ground, her spine straight, her expression carefully neutral. The small, terrified child who had once clung to his trousers was gone, replaced by a woman who had learned to stand on her own, fiercely independent. This was her space, her victory, and he was an uninvited spectre. The sight of her, so vibrant and strong, struck Gabriel with a force more potent than any financial ruin. He had expected to find a fragile, perhaps bitter woman, easy to manipulate, a means to an end. Instead, he saw a testament to defiance, a living embodiment of the life he had so carelessly discarded. Her art, with its profound emotional depth, spoke of a journey he had tried to deny. He saw the strength in her eyes, the quiet dignity, and a wave of something unfamiliar washed over him, not just regret, but a searing shame. He hadn't just abandoned a child, he had abandoned a future, a connection, a legacy of true human worth. The magnitude of his error, for the first time, felt truly crushing. Their eyes met across the crowded room, a silent collision of past and present. Clara's gaze was steady, unwavering, holding a lifetime of unspoken questions and an unyielding resolve. Gabriel's, in stark contrast, faltered, filled with a mixture of awe, regret, and a profound, unfamiliar sense of loss. He saw not the burden he had once perceived, but the extraordinary woman she had become, despite him. The power dynamic, once so brutally clear, had irrevocably shifted. He, the once powerful magnate, stood diminished and exposed, while she, the abandoned child, stood radiant in her self-made glory, utterly in control of her narrative and her future. Did he recognize the depth of what he had truly lost, or only what he could no longer gain? In that brief, charged moment, Clara felt the echoes of her past pain, the terror of the pantry, the cold loneliness of the orphanage, the yearning for a love denied. But these were echoes, not overwhelming torrents. The woman she had become, shaped by Elena and Ricardo's love and Miss Isabel's guidance, stood firm. She saw his decline, the hollowness in his eyes, and a complex wave of emotions passed through her, not pity, but a profound understanding of the emptiness that had always defined him. She no longer sought his approval, his love, or even an explanation. Her worth was not contingent on his recognition. She was enough, whole and complete, without him. The art surrounding them, Clara's art, seemed to hum with a newfound intensity. A piece depicting a lone figure reaching for a distant sun, another showing intricate patterns emerging from deep shadow, now took on a poignant, almost prophetic significance. The onlookers, oblivious to the silent drama unfolding between father and daughter, continued to admire the aesthetic beauty, the emotional resonance. But for Clara and Gabriel, each stroke, each color, was a chapter in their shared, fractured history. Her art was her truth, a public declaration that she had not just survived, but had transformed her darkest moments into something beautiful and enduring. Gabriel took a hesitant step forward, then another, his hand almost reaching out, a silent plea hanging in the air. Clara watched him, her gaze unwavering, a silent question in her eyes. What now? The gallery's chatter seemed to fade, leaving only the profound silence between them, thick with 2 decades of pain, regret, and the undeniable force of her triumph. The abandoned child had found her voice, her strength, her purpose. The man who cast her out now stood before her, stripped bare. In that moment, the question wasn't about forgiveness, but about acknowledgement. Could he ever truly understand the woman he had helped create, or merely the empire she had built? You might wonder in this situation, would you forgive, or would the silence speak volumes? Clara's gallery exhibition was not a final destination, but a vibrant new beginning. Her art continued to evolve, each canvas a deeper exploration of human resilience, a testament to the fact that even the most profound darkness could yield extraordinary light. She established a foundation, the canvas of hope, dedicated to providing art therapy for children who had experienced trauma, particularly those in orphanages or foster care. Her studio, now a bustling hub of creativity, was often filled with the quiet, focused energy of young artists, their small hands clutching brushes, their eyes reflecting the nascent hope Clara had once so desperately sought. She didn't just paint her story, she used her gift to help others paint theirs, transforming her own scars into pathways for healing. Have you ever considered how your deepest wounds could become your greatest strengths? Elena and Ricardo remained the unwavering anchors of her life, their modest home a sanctuary of unconditional love. Clara often visited, bringing new paintings for their walls, sharing stories of the children her foundation was helping. Their quiet pride in her achievements was palpable, a gentle, constant affirmation that she was cherished, not for what she achieved, but for who she was. The deep-seated fears of abandonment, though still a distant echo, no longer held her captive. She understood now that love wasn't something earned or begged for, but a choice, freely given and received. Her relationship with them was a living, breathing testament to the profound truth that family is forged in love, not just in blood. Could a bond built on genuine care truly overcome the absence of a biological one? Gabriel's world, stripped bare of its material trappings, never truly recovered. He vanished from the public eye, a cautionary tale of ambition unmoored from empathy. Clara rarely thought of him, and when she did, it was with a quiet detachment, not resentment. His absence no longer defined her, nor did his brief, desperate reappearance. She had chosen to forgive, not for his sake, but for her own, understanding that clinging to bitterness was like drinking poison and expecting the other person to suffer. Her peace was a fiercely guarded treasure, built brick by resilient brick, and she wouldn't allow his shadow to obscure its light. The justice she sought wasn't retribution, but the vibrant, purposeful life she now lived. Do you believe that true forgiveness is a gift you give yourself, freeing you from the chains of the past? The journey to inner peace was not a straight path, but Clara embraced its winding turns. She still sometimes sought solace in the quiet solitude of her studio, not to escape, but to connect with the deeper parts of herself. The terror of darkness had been transformed into an understanding of its necessity for light to truly shine, a theme that permeated her later works. She found joy in simple moments, the scent of rain, the warmth of a sunrise, the laughter of a child in her program. Her life was a vibrant tapestry, woven from threads of resilience, creativity, and profound empathy, a stark contrast to the small, terrified girl huddled in a dark pantry. Her past had forged her, not broken her. How do you find beauty in the shadows? knowing they make the light even brighter. Clara's story, shared through her art and her foundation, became a powerful beacon of hope for countless others. Children who felt lost and unloved found their voices through her programs, their own canvases becoming testaments to their burgeoning strength. Parents, struggling with their own vulnerabilities, found inspiration in her journey, learning to offer the unconditional love that had saved Clara. She proved through her very existence that abandonment is a beginning, not an end, a crucible for strength, not a sentence to perpetual despair. The girl who was deemed an encumbrance had become an embodiment of purpose, a living testament to the transformative power of love and art. If you had the chance to inspire a child, what message of hope would you share? Clara's life was a profound answer to the question she had once asked in the dark. Was I unlovable? The world had answered with a resounding no. She was not defined by the rejection of a cold-hearted man, but by the embrace of a loving family, the mentorship of a wise teacher, and her own unyielding spirit. Her story resonated with a universal truth, that true worth comes from within, cultivated through resilience and expressed through purpose. She was rejected by someone who should have loved her, but was embraced by the world, turning her deepest wounds into a wellspring of connection and hope. Her existence became a powerful lesson, not just for Gabriel, but for anyone who has ever felt cast aside. Love, in its purest form, always finds a way to heal, to build, and to ultimately triumph.